Oh, kya haal hai mere sheron? Well, before you watch this podcast, there are 2 or 3 things. First, this is going to be one of the most intriguing podcasts. Genuinely, one of the most intriguing podcasts you will hear till date about geopolitics, history and wars. तुम्हारे लिए podcast के बीच में मैंने एक golden बात भी share की है and I hope it gets to you. But for now, let's get to the podcast.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much for being here. It's actually a pleasure to meet you. You are as charming in person as you are on a screen.
Hey, pleasure to meet you as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, sir. So I'll actually set the stage for this conversation. I was actually speaking to a friend of mine who was fighting in the front lines in Israel.
Okay.
I just mentioned to you how I was friends with a lot of Israelis, and this one was a particularly close friend. And so he gave me a secure link on Zoom. He was like, listen, I can't give you like a public link. We have to talk like this. And he was in a barrack or some stuff, properly wearing his outfits.
I see.
And I was like, so what is the situation? Like, you guys are obviously stronger. When do you think this ends? And he was like, this could be 3 months to 10 years. And I was like, why do you think that? And he said something very interesting. He said, Prakhar, you have to understand, this is not an isolated war.
Yeah.
That this is part of a 3-pronged war that is now beginning to take shape. The first prong is in Ukraine and Russia.
Yes.
The second is Israel-Palestine. And the third one he seemed to suggest is going to be in the South China Sea around Taiwan. Then I started thinking a little further, seeing how Pakistan is battling Afghanistan, Iran, clearly losing to India. China is consolidating on another front. And Kashmir looks so safe. Kashmir looks so stable right now. Tourist galore right now. It makes me feel like it might not be a 3-pronged, in fact, might be a 4-pronged situation. And so all of this led me to believe, all of these in my nightmarish evening time wanderings made me to believe, is there a possibility for a world war that we might be seeing? And I thought, who better than to talk to you about? So my question, sir, is if you were a betting man, would you think we were near about a World War III, or if we are not near, when might that shape up, etc., etc., etc.?
Well, I don't think we are near a World War III. At least I hope we are not. But yes, there are these major flashpoints that we very clearly observe in the world. So we obviously have the Ukraine situation, which started on the 24th or 22nd of February 2022. 24th, I believe, with the special military operation. So it's an undeclared war, right? That's which is going on in Ukraine. And we know how that's going. I mean, everyone's been saying that Russia is losing. They've been losing men, material, everything. They're running out of supplies. But, well, they still are there. And we know what's happening in Ukraine. The Ukrainian armed forces are running out of people, fighting age people. Now they are even pushing pregnant women into the front lines. And we're seeing a whole new form of warfare emerging over there. Drone warfare. Drones coordinating together, attacking warships, drones attacking human beings. A totally new kind of warfare, 21st century warfare, is being tested out on the battlefield in Ukraine. So we have Ukraine. Then we have this new conflagration in Israel, the Middle East. So the Middle East has always had these battle lines drawn for the longest time. And, the root cause essentially is the external interference in the Middle East. If you look at the map of the Middle East, you will see straight lines everywhere. The straight lines were drawn by outside forces, and wherever you draw straight lines, you're going to divide communities that and put communities together that don't belong together. So we have all these issues in the Middle East. Very badly divided place, and there's always other powers, stronger powers, external powers that are playing one side off against the other for their own personal benefit. So the main deal in the Middle East is oil, obviously, and for the longest time, oil was the Achilles heel of the West. They did not have, energy self-sufficiency. Now the US is the net exporter of energy, essentially, petroleum products. So they no longer have that issue, but they still are the major force in the Middle East. I mean, if you look at the balance of power, you have Iraq, which is no longer a power after Saddam Hussein was kicked off.
Eradicated.
You have Iran, you have Saudi Arabia, you have Israel, obviously a major power. You have Syria, which is supported by Russia. And you also have the shadow of Turkey, which is not really far away. So all of that happening over there. You have nations like the UAE, etc., that desire stability. Even Saudi Arabia desires stability. And there's the China factor as well. So much going on there.
Right.
So this is a flashpoint. That's going to be a flashpoint. And obviously the Gaza issue, the Palestinian issue is going to be something that's, there's no resolution in sight for that. So there is that. And then there is the China factor. So China, I mean, this was supposed to be the Chinese century, right? It was supposed to be that. China was supposed to be the rising superpower which aspires to replace and displace the US by roughly 2050 and become the major power. Well, that's also not happening, but China is a major force, no doubt about it. It's the only major power except apart from the US. It's no match for the US, actually in terms of overall comprehensive hard power, but it's a very major force. You could say China is if not the largest and most powerful force, the second largest and most powerful force in Asia. Russia is actually the real.
Still?
Oh, absolutely. Just look at their nuclear power. Russia has a small economy comparatively. Russia has a small military also. If you look at their military expenditure per year, it's not much compared to other countries. But if you look at the nuclear strength that they have, that's the one X factor. It's the unfair advantage Russia has. The world's largest nuclear arsenal.
Even bigger than America?
Oh, absolutely. Russia's nuclear arsenal is bigger than that of the US. It's the number one arsenal in the world.
Oh my God, I had no idea.
Yeah. So Russia cannot be discounted. It's the one unfair advantage they have, and even China is dwarfed by that nuclear might and overall might of Russia. And of course the land area that they have and all that they control almost half of Eurasia. They have a significant power projection in Central Asia and all the way to the far east of Asia, Vladivostok and all that.
Right.
So there is that. And then there's China, which has all these expansionist tendencies. It's an imperial nation. They want to, if you look at the nations they neighbor, they have territorial disputes with essentially every single nation. And they have reopened some territorial disputes with Russia as well now. Okay. So there's China. And obviously the focus of attention is going to be the South China Sea. China is hemmed in by these island chains which are controlled by the US. We have Taiwan, then we have Japan, South Korea, all that. Then you have the Marshall Islands. So like 3 island chains that kind of hem China in. And China aspires to break free of those island chains because they have the world's largest navy, military, numerically, in terms of number of hulls, number of ships. China has the largest navy, not necessarily in terms of actual kinetic power, but definitely in terms of numbers. And quantity has a quality of its own, like Joseph Stalin said. So China has that, but they are hemmed in by those island chains that encircle them. So they aspire to break free of that. And Taiwan is obviously where it all hopefully begins from their perspective. But imagine this, Taiwan is right in China's backyard. Just a stone's throw away from China's coast, and yet they can't take Taiwan. That's how powerful the US actually is. So there is that thing. So you have a number of flashpoints. You could even consider the India, Tibet, and Pakistan trijunction in the north of India to be a major flashpoint, a potential flashpoint. Nothing's happening there now, but who knows what could happen there.
Right.
So there are active flashpoints like active volcanoes, and there are potential flashpoints like dormant volcanoes. So there's a number of these scattered around the world. So and we have then the global choke points, the geopolitical choke points, which means the places where you can choke off the free navigation of ships and trade and all that.
Like the Suez and Panama?
Yes, so Suez is one, Panama is one. Then you have the Strait of Bab al-Mandeb between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Then you have the Strait of Hormuz, which is between the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. And then you have the Strait of Malacca, which is between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. And you have various nations that dominate these various choke points. And India is a not so small player in a couple of these. For example, we can certainly police, so to say, the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Bab al-Mandeb, and the Strait of Malacca. So we have power projection. We don't necessarily choose to exercise that. But as you can see, we are doing anti-piracy operations all the way to the mouth of the Red Sea right now. And we're doing it successfully. While the Chinese have a base there in Djibouti, but they're not doing much. Means they are watching and enjoying what's happening. They're not really intervening and preventing the piracy from happening. The Chinese. We are doing that. So there are all these issues there, which we can see. So right now, there is a certain balance of power in the world. You take a snapshot of the world at any given point in time, you will see a certain balance of power. And if you take these snapshots over a period of 10 years, you will see a changing balance of power. It's an automatically evolving, naturally evolving balance of power. It follows Darwinian principles. Power is like a force. It's like a pressure. And whichever nation has more power exerts a pressure outwards. And you will see these interplays of various pressures between regional powers, global powers, and so on. So the global power is the US. The major regional power in Asia is China, and of course Russia as well. And you have another regional power, which is India, and Iran is there, Saudi Arabia is there, all of that. So right now I don't see a world war erupting. But if somebody messes up something, if somebody miscalculates somewhere and makes one wrong choice, you could see a whole chain of events going off, a chain reaction kind of thing happening, which I don't think anybody really wants to see.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the situation right now, the way I see it.
Right. I also think that almost, and this is why it surprises me, right? Like I remember when the Ukraine thing happened, I started really following it on Twitter. I had my whole bookmarks around this because I was like, this is the first time in my life, and I'm 28 soon. This is the first time in my life that we are actually seeing somebody risk this stuff, right? Like this could be, like you said, a flashpoint with several orders of consequence. Then I saw this with Israel-Palestine. And both times I've kind of seen this become back-page newspaper stuff. Like it happens and then nobody really cares about it. For a month, my father would ask me, are your friends okay? For a month, I would text all my friends, are you guys okay? And then it acquires this sort of passivity. And it just like, I wonder if the wars are going to be even the same anymore. Because you were mentioning, right, like drone warfare. That's such an interesting idea. No man involved. Drones just come in, blast everything out of place, and then you're done.
Yeah.
And now with artificial intelligence, robotics, and whatever coming in, are we, like, what kind of warfare are we expecting to see, if at all?
Yeah, warfare is changing. Warfare is evolving. So we had 20th century warfare, which involved these tank charges. Tanks were a big deal.
Panzers,
that's the Second World War.
Right.
And then you had different kinds of tanks, more evolved kind of tanks. So every nation has every major nation has a large number of tanks. So tank warfare was a big deal in the 20th century. These massed artillery charges, blitzkrieg warfare, you punch a hole through, see, battle and warfare is all about energy and momentum. If you see a battle from 10,000 feet above the ground level or 30,000 feet above, you will see, you will see the flow of energy and momentum. That's what you see. And if you concentrate energy in a certain point, and you can punch a hole through the defenses and you can just go through. So that's how it is. So you can do the same thing with drones. So today you have this entire new paradigm of warfare in which human beings are less involved. You may even have AI, in artificial intelligence. You may have a bunch of drones, let's say 200 drones which operate autonomously, but that are controlled by satellites. And there's an AI behind this, and they coordinate the drones in a certain way. They can punch a hole through defenses and all that. So that is a new form of warfare that's happening. You also have interdiction warfare, which is you have a number of missiles. Let's say you have cheap missiles. One missile costs $2,000. Okay, very cheap missile.
Very cheap.
But they're reasonably accurate. They're not pinpoint accuracy, but you have 10,000 of those missiles. So you can deny a whole area from the opponent. The opponent, your adversary may not be able to make a move in that specific area in which you have the ability to project power through those missiles. So this entire new form of warfare that's coming up. So warfare is evolving, and we are still seeing it being tested out in places like Ukraine. So Ukraine is right now the testing ground, the proving ground of new forms of warfare. You also had some of this in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, in which you saw all these loitering munitions, becoming very effective. They would take out tanks, cheap loitering munitions. And
wait, what is cheap loitering?
A loitering munition is kind of it's a cross between a missile and an aircraft or in a drone kind of.
Okay.
It loiters around for half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and then suddenly it strikes somewhere.
Achha. So and as a mechanism it goes, or does it release a missile?
No, it's a
thing itself.
It's a suicide drone. Ooh. It's a suicide thing. It has a charge of its own, an explosive charge on it on its body, but it's gonna loiter around apparently aimlessly for a certain period of time.
To confuse
you. So it looks like it's in the background. It's just loitering around 10,000 feet up or whatever 1,000 feet up. It's just going here and there, but it has its eyes on something. And at a certain point in time, when the operators decide, or when the AI perhaps decides, it's going to go and do a strike. So you can use loitering munitions to take out tanks. You can use them to take out armored vehicles or just transport vehicles. And some loitering munitions are even used to take out individual human beings.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's how it's going right now.
Interesting. Actually, that reminds me. I was also friends with a lot of army vets from America. And some of them, actually all of them had served in Afghanistan. Some of them had even served in Iraq. And so, once you get enough alcohol in someone's system, people loosen up. They talk about things. And a lot of them showed me footages I don't know if this is going to get them in trouble, but a lot of them showed me footages and a lot of them showed me pictures and a lot of them told me stories about weaponry that made no sense. Like they would be looking at somebody on a screen, be like, okay, press enter, boom.
Yeah.
As if like they already had some kind of weaponry pointing from somewhere. Like that is so interesting that the fact that they had Afghanistan all mapped out on satellite weaponry.
Yes.
Wow. And so somebody's sitting in America or somebody's sitting in some random village on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan could manage all of Afghanistan from a click.
So typically it would be somebody sitting in New Mexico or somewhere half the world away, and they would be operating these remote controlled drones, the predator drones, MQ, whatever it's called. And these drones would have missiles. I think they were called Hellfire missiles. And they would loiter, like these were medium altitude or high altitude drones that would be like beyond your sight and sound. You can't hear them, you can't see them. They're reasonably small, they're really high up, you can't see them. And then they can unleash hell on demand. So you just press a button and it's gonna unleash a missile. You can take out a single individual or a single vehicle or whatever you want. You can take out a bunch of people if you like.
And so this is what I mean. Like every time somebody's been a China optimist around me and they're like, you don't know what China is doing. I'm like, you have no idea what America even has. I don't think America has idea what they have because they spend so much money on military each year. They have an undisclosed amount that goes into their military budget. It's apparently more than half of their budget each year or some significant proportion of all the money that they put in. And I think most of that technology is sitting in warehouses, not even being used or tested out in New Mexico and Nevada deserts. Ki agar hoga kabhi war to dekh lenge. Do you know of any of this stuff?
Look, I can only speculate. We know that every nation has a disclosed budget for their military. So the US budget is about $800 or $900 billion. Okay, roughly, I'm giving a ballpark figure.
Right.
Close to $1 trillion.
Right.
But the US is also speculated to have black budgets, which are not disclosed to the public.
Right.
So I would imagine the yearly budget for the US military would be roughly around $1 trillion if you include the speculative hypothetical black budget. And if you look at the overall hard power of the US, which is composed of various factors like its nuclear strength, its military expenditure, its economic, the size of the GDP, the size of the economy, the size of their power projection. One of the factors you have to take into consideration is the number of extraterritorial military bases a nation has. So India has, let's say, between 5 and 7 extraterritorial military bases.
Which ones?
There's supposed to be something in Mauritius, something in Oman, something in Tajikistan, here and there a little bit.
Okay.
So we have a little bit of power projection ability. China has 3 or 4 extraterritorial military bases. One is in Djibouti, which is at the Strait of Bab al-Mandeb, and a couple here and there. Okay, we could include the Hambantota port in that. We could include a port in Myanmar in that, and maybe also the Gwadar port in Pakistan. So China has a few. The US, if you look at the US, okay, Russia has about 24, 25 extraterritorial military bases. The US has more than 750.
Wow.
750 beyond its territory.
All NATO camps are included.
NATO, etc., NATO plus, and non-NATO as well.
Japan, South Korea, then Australia, New Zealand, all of that, right?
Yeah, so Australia essentially is a property of the US from that perspective, from a pure power perspective. Japan is under permanent US military occupation, more than 120 permanent military bases. South Korea, same thing, and so on. So if you add all of that together, the US, I would say, has power projection over more than 60% of the global surface. And if you factor that in, then that's a major force multiplier on your military and economic strength. So if you factor all these things together, when we compare the power of nations, we typically think of the GDP. But we have to take a lot of other factors into account. And when we do that, you find that the US dwarfs whatever China is. It totally dwarfs China. China is no match to the US. The only nation that can stand up to the US is Russia, actually. So from that perspective, if you look at the top 5 powers, I would say it's Russia. It's the US, big dog, top dog by a long distance. Then you have Russia. Then you have China, India, and France.
France.
Yeah, France is kind of a power.
France is a big deal, huh?
France is not a big deal. It's a medium deal.
It's a medium
deal. India is a medium deal itself, okay?
Right.
India is slightly a bigger deal than France right now.
Okay.
And India has an independent foreign policy. France has a quasi-independent foreign policy because they are part of the EU, they're part of NATO, which are both essentially dominated and one could say controlled by the US.
Right.
But France has an independent nuclear deterrent. They have their own nuclear submarines with their own nuclear missiles and their own nuclear warheads. Compare that with the UK. The UK has aircraft carriers and nuclear warheads, but those nuclear warheads are mated to American Trident missiles.
What does that mean?
So it means that you have nuclear warheads, the actual explosive charge,
Sure.
the nuclear charge.
Right.
But that is placed on top of a missile. The
Okay.
missile is the delivery system. You
Okay.
want to send a gift to somebody, you have to send it by postage or whatever.
Right.
So the missile is the delivery system.
Right.
The missiles that the UK warheads are using are American missiles.
It effectively tells you what UK is. It's a little baby for America.
It tells you that the UK is a satellite state of the US.
Yes,
okay,
yes,
it means that the big red button is in Washington, not in London.
Not
it's not
in
in Rishi Sunak's hands.
Right, yeah.
There you have it.
Or the royal family or any of them.
Or whoever it is.
Yeah.
But in the case of France, they have their own red button.
Okay.
So that's the difference between the UK and France. So for France has a kind of quasi-independent foreign policy. They have significant power projection in Africa, Western Africa, the Sahel region of Africa, and they have significant island possessions in the Indian Ocean region. So they have a significant interest in the Indian Ocean region, and they have a reasonably good power projection of their own, which could be to some extent kind of independent from the US. And I can assure you from my own understanding and my sources that the French,
The
French,
sources.
Yeah,
the sources.
the French do not quite regard the US as a friendly power.
Acha.
Oh, they don't.
Can you tell me about your sources?
I cannot tell you about the sources.
I understand what you mean by that. I think the French are a very interesting kind of people overall. They are probably they smell of independence within the EU. The only country that I can look at and be like, they have their own thought, they have their own sort of ideas. Because Germany and now UK is no longer part of the EU. They appear very mainstream. And nobody else seems to have any power.
Look, Germany is under US occupation, just like Japan or South Korea.
Acha.
Their constitution was essentially written by the Americans, okay? Indirectly, I mean, it's made to look like it's been done after the Second World War by Germans themselves, but it was entirely done under the supervision of the US, so which means that not a single word of the constitution was something that the Americans would not approve of. Okay, and they have permanent US military, bases, weapons, nuclear weapons on their soil. There are multiple European nations that have American nuclear weapons on their soil. What does it tell you? Those weapons aren't controlled by those host nations. They're controlled by the US. So you are allowing the US to emplace their most dangerous weapons on your soil, but you're not able to control that. And so on and so forth. So all these nations, they don't really have genuine sovereignty as such. And Germany, not at all. Germany is not a sovereign nation from my perspective.
Right.
And even if you look at the nation like Italy, for example, even they have permanent US bases on their soil. And what they say is that these military bases are operated and allowed on Italian territory with the permission of the Italian government and so on and so forth. But it's not like the Italian government is going to ask them to leave.
Yeah.
The Iraqis have been asking the Americans to leave for quite some time.
Right.
Has it happened?
No.
It's not happened. So there you have it.
Well, as I said, एक तगड़ी golden चीज बताऊंगा तुम्हें. It's time. World wars, politics, ammunitions, this kind of information might make you feel slightly uncomfortable, maybe even anxious. But most importantly, it makes you aware of the reality of the world we are living in. मैं बहुत दिनों से खुद काफी historical चीजें which have had a lot of impact on humans उनके बारे में सुन रहा हूँ. And to be honest, I'm stunned by how we as humans can pull off so many great things for our survival. But how do I get to know about all of this? Well, here's the golden thing. Recently, I came across this app called Cuckoo FM, which I never thought would be my source of information, but I was amazed by the kind of detailed audiobooks the app has. The topics about World War that Abhijit and I are discussing right now, the World War, drones, India's relationships with the world, India's geopolitical situation, ये सब आप in detail में जान सकते हो. I have listened to some books which were detailed enough to make me visualize things. I'm suggesting these 3 audiobooks which I think could make a difference. Check them out. Number 1, The Battle of Imphal and Kohima, India's World War II. Number 2, The Days That Shook the World. And number 3, Alan Turing, Decrypting Germans. The app has audiobooks not only about history but geopolitics, fiction, finance, self-help, etc., etc., etc. It is available in 9 different regional languages. तुम कभी भी सुन सकते हो while driving or traveling, and you can easily invest that time in listening to audiobooks. It's fun at the end of the day knowing some well-kept secrets about our history and the politics of the world. Download the app now. आप लोगों के लिए 50% ऑफ का कूपन भी लिखा है प्रखर 50, जिसे यूज करके आप फर्स्ट मंथ पे डायरेक्ट 50% डिस्काउंट भी ले सकते हो only at ₹49. And comment में मुझे बताओ, which audiobook did you listen to?
I think it's a very interesting fact because when we think of global powers, or at least the common man, somebody like myself, when we think of it, we think of okay, GDP sizes, right? Trade, commerce, that kind of stuff, or we think of military size. So I feel like this is so interesting that there is this undercurrent we don't notice. And my understanding is that even this rise of geopolitical discourse, people like yourself to some degree, but also in the very official sense of the word, we see our government giving a damn about foreign policy with a strongish hand for the first time, at least since I've been alive. And it sort of begins to beg the question, what is India's, like, how do I begin to see India's position now? Do I see this as, are we independent? Are we somehow, is there some shadowy control that some country has on us? How do I compare it to China, who is our next door unfriendly neighbor, or the United States and our relation? So like, I'm just trying to understand that.
So it's like this. Sovereignty is kind of a slightly nebulous concept, okay? Sovereignty is very hard to define and quantify. I would quantify a nation's sovereignty from a scale of 0 to 1. So the US is 1 on the sovereignty scale. So is Russia, so is China. The more powerful you are, the more sovereign you are. What does it mean that you're sovereign? It means that you are entirely in charge, entirely in control of everything that happens to your nation internally and externally, which means that you can prevent other nations from interfering in your internal affairs while interfering in their internal affairs. That is sovereignty,
right?
And that's a measure of power. So the more powerful you are, the more sovereign you are, and the more immune you are to external interference. So if you were to talk about India, I would say compared to nations like France or Japan or Germany or Saudi Arabia or Israel, let's not talk about Israel, but all these nations, India is way more sovereign. India can push back and say no to the US on a whole number of things. For example, right now they wanted India to be part of their peacekeeping operations in the Red Sea region. They wanted India to be part of the US coalition, that we would send warships that would be under perhaps a centralized kind of command, which would not be in India's hands and all that. We said, no, we will do our own operations, which will be independent of yours. So we can say no to the US. That is sovereignty. Okay. So there is that. Obviously, there are certain other factors, like the US has Pakistan. Pakistan is a US satellite state, so to say.
Right.
And they can do certain things to India, and we have to kind of,
strategically play that game on a 4D chessboard.
We have to play the long-term game and swallow some short-term pain and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's the situation in the northeast of India, far east of India, the Manipur situation and all, which is also a geopolitical situation, whether we realize it or not. There's a whole game being played out over there.
Okay, I'll ask you about this. Yes.
Yeah, so there are multiple things. But overall, if you look at India, India is a sovereign nation, for sure. India is immune to a large extent, at least at the central government level, to any kind of arm twisting and bullying. Obviously, there are certain things that go on, which every nation makes some give and take and all that. But overall, we are a way more sovereign nation than nations like Japan or Germany or France or the weaker nations.
Right.
So we are a top 5 nation now for sure in terms of overall power, not just GDP. So there is that. India is playing its own game right now. So like you said, in the last 10 years, India has emerged as a geopolitical voice in its own right. It's only possible if you have your own. Let's.
Bro, इसको ना छोड़ ही देना तुम podcast में, कोई सीन नहीं है. सुनने दो लोगों को, common man की आवाज, कोई लोड नहीं है.
चलो ठीक है,
let's keep going.
So that sort of thing can only happen when you are a power in your own right. And when you have an actual amount of geopolitical power. So India is now rising as a geopolitical power on the basis of the economic rise of India. Without money, you can't build a military.
No.
Without money, you can't build power projection abilities. Without money, you can't build anything. So India is rising as an economy. It's the number 5 economy in the world right now. India has a growing military might as well. India is now starting to indigenize its weapons production. India has a growing navy, which gives it a growing geopolitical footprint in the Indian Ocean region. We always used to say that the Indian Ocean region is our strategic backyard. It was all talk. Now we are starting to walk the talk. Words don't matter. Your actions matter. Now we are beginning to act in the Indian Ocean region. We can see an Indian naval presence and an effective Indian naval presence in this region. And there's a whole lot more going in. The US needs India to counterbalance China, but they use Pakistan and other things to counterbalance India.
Right.
So it's that kind of a game.
So complicated.
It's actually the logic of power.
Right.
If you look at it just from a perspective of numbers and power, it makes a lot of sense. They want a certain kind of regional power balance in every region. So, for example, you have the Indian subcontinent region, there's a certain balance of power. India is obviously the hegemonic power over here. If you were to use the raw terms of geopolitics, the hegemon is the most powerful nation in any region.
Okay.
And there's a global hegemon as well. So, in the Indian Ocean region, clearly India is the hegemon. And the US needs India to a certain extent to counterbalance China, because China is obviously a problem for the US. Now, the problem for China is that they have issues with everybody, and the problem for Russia is that they are right now kind of over-dependent on China. So, the Russians would very much like India to counterbalance China as well.
Okay.
And they would like to see India rise more, because India is not a threat to Russia.
Right. India's friends with Russia, as far as at least geopolitically speaking.
Well, there are no friends or enemies in geopolitics.
Right.
But if you just look at the strategy, the logic of strategy, the stronger India gets, the freer Russia is from China. That's just how it goes.
Oh my God.
And it's a long-term thing. It's not like the next 2 weeks. It's the next 50 years, next 100 years.
Right.
So India and Russia, from these perspectives, are kind of long-term allies, natural allies. India and the US are medium-term allies as long as the China threat is there.
Right.
Once the US feels that China is no longer a problem, they're going to
Shift our focus to us.
Focus to India.
Right.
Because India is a growing power. It's the only power that's not projected to have a recession next 10, 20 years. It's the only power that is projected to go beyond China. See, China has multiple problems. China has this big economy. They have worked their butts off to build this massive economy. Okay, they are like 17, 18 trillion right now. Right? India is what? Roughly slightly less than 4 trillion.
Right.
So China is like 4 times, more than 4 times, maybe let's say 5 times that of India economically. And from all power perspectives, from whatever calculations you can do, China is about like way bigger than India, roughly 5 times bigger than India.
Size-wise?
Power-wise.
Okay.
The X factor that India has is the nuclear deterrent. So China cannot cross certain lines when it comes to India.
Because we have nuclear deterrent.
Because we have the nuclear deterrent, and if they cross certain lines, they stand to lose everything they've built.
Right.
No one wants that. It's a lose-lose scenario when you go into nuclear war scenarios.
Right.
So China cannot go beyond a certain line with India, and India has good defensive capabilities along the Himalayan region, which is a very challenging terrain and so on. So we have a reasonable amount of balance right here. The thing is that China has many problems of its own. First of all, it has a demographic issue. So there is something called TFR, total fertility rate.
Okay.
So that is on average, how many children does the average woman in that nation produce?
Okay.
Right. In her lifetime.
Right.
So to sustain your population, you need a TFR, total fertility rate of 2.1. So the average woman should produce on average 2.1 children. That's how you can sustain your population. In India, it's 2.0. So we're slightly below replacement. Okay.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. In China, it's 1.09. What that tells you, and China's median age right now is 38. So the average Chinese citizen is 38 years old. And they have a total fertility rate of 1.09, which means that their population is going to decline drastically. There's a demographic disaster impending. By 2100, their population from all projections is expected to be around 600-700 million. Less than half of what it is today. And it's going to be way older, like around 58 or something, median age. Imagine a nation where the average person is 58 years old.
That's a very bad situation to be in.
And more. There's more to this. In China, China is a really, really, really strange society. You go to China, you meet any person, an average person, random person. That person won't have any brother or sister.
Yeah.
He won't have any cousins. He won't have any aunt or uncle. He won't have any nephews or nieces. He's just what is left of an ancient lineage. Every family is an ancient lineage. And in China, every individual is what is left. The only thing that is left of an ancient lineage. Now imagine you have a young man who is being sent to the front lines to fight for China.
You're basically decimating your ancients.
You're decimating your ancient lineages. And every family it cherishes whatever is left of its lineage. It doesn't want that to be extinguished.
Right.
So there is this psychological factor that every soldier who goes to the front line knows full well that he might take a bullet and that will be the end of his entire lineage. So that is a huge incentive or disincentive towards fighting. They want to stay alive. They don't want to die. Right. It doesn't, you die, your entire lineage goes. Right. Your family line dies with you.
Right.
So there are all these factors when it comes to China. And there are the economic bubbles and whatnot. And obviously it's a one-party system, the imperial,
Communist China
kind of thing and all. So there is a lot of problems within China. So if you look at the long-term prognosis for China, it's not great. It's not great at all. But till 2050 or so, it's going to be a major economy. And from our perspective, it's going to be a major threat. But long term, if we can ride out that wave till 2050, No one can stop us.
Okay, I have a tiny question and then I have a bigger question. I'll ask both of them so we can sort of,
Yeah.
The tiny question is this, that if India has a 2.0 birth rate
Yeah.
and we reproduce like flies, right? Like, I think I sneeze and there is 10,000 more of us like in that very minute. Then and given that all Western countries have an actual fertility problem where they take like months to pretty much get pregnant, which I think is a silent biological disaster that nobody ever speaks about. Like when I'm in America and Europe and they tell me about we've been trying to get pregnant for 2 years, I'm like, man, if you were in India, it would just snap and you're there, right?
Yeah.
Then what are their TFRs and how is that not a dangerous worldwide situation?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the second question, just so I place
yeah.
it on the table, is I often feel that this kind of friendship we have with the United States as a counterbalance to China is not healthy. I know Indians like it because we feel like we're on the stronger side, but I feel like we will be the sacrificial lamb in this case. Like they'll throw us to be like, tum lad lo, you take their power away and then we'll come sort of capture whatever is left.
Yeah.
So those are my two questions.
So when it comes to the TFR in Europe, it's all bad. There's no nation that I can think of in Europe that has a healthy TFR. And you must have heard Elon Musk complaining about this, falling population levels are a problem, not rising population levels. Because we have the technology, the resources, all that to sustain large populations, 8, 9 trillion, whatever it is right now. What is it?
7 point something.
7 point something right now.
Jamie, pull that up, bro.
Yeah, so it's around 7 point something trillion, less than 8.
Right.
But we have the technology, the resources, the know-how and so on and so forth to sustain a population of, let's say, 10 trillion. Let's say, okay? The problem is that when your population...
7.8.
7.8. The problem is when your population starts to decline over time, over a long period of time, what that does is that it starts raising the median age of a nation, of a population. What that tells you is that the entire vigor of the population goes down. The older you are on average, the less vigorous you are. That's just a fact of life.
Yeah, you're less aggressive, you're less fighty, less expansionist, less all of that.
All of that, yeah.
You're more wise.
You're wiser and you're slower and you're more of a less of a risk taker.
Live and let live kind of thing.
Yeah. So what happens is that it brings down the overall energy level of a nation, the vigor of a nation, and the overall output, productivity, all of that of a nation. It's bad for a nation to have a high median age. Right. So you have declining birth rates. So you are producing fewer and fewer kids every year on aggregate, and you have an ever aging population. That's what's happening across the West, across Europe, across the Americas. What you're seeing in Russia, in Russia as well actually. Russia, Japan, South Korea, you're seeing that. India, we are at 2.0. Japan is bad.
South Korea, they don't want to get married because they're like the cost of living is so high. I don't want to have kids.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to have kids.
It's so
it's
interesting
crazy.
because we don't give a shit about that at all, no matter how much money we have in our pockets in India, right? Like it's so interesting. Anyway, yes, please.
Yeah, so that's the deal. Okay,
Right.
so what's happening now in Europe is that they're importing people from other parts of the world, like Africa and all that, and they're gonna bring in the vigor and all that, but that's gonna
Change the demographic forever.
Well, you know what? One of the national security issues, one of the national interests, one of the core or vital or non-negotiable national interests of any nation, of any society, is demographic and religious and cultural continuity and integrity, and that's being messed with when you do large scale immigration from any other part of the world.
Right.
I'm not saying X nation or Y nation, any nation.
Any mass immigration of
Any
that
mass
nature
immigration.
historically has proven to truly tear the social fabric in certain ways.
And
Yes.
that's what we are beginning to see in Europe.
Exactly.
In various parts of Europe. Okay,
Yes.
so that's the deal. So their TFR is falling. Their average median age is rising. These are becoming older societies, and then they are importing people from other parts of the world who have a totally different set of values and customs and all that, and that's causing all these clashes. So that's what we are seeing in Europe. Now, the other question that you raised is that we could end up being the sacrificial lambs for
the United
US,
States
the
and
US.
NATO, yes.
Well, look at Ukraine. We see
That's
precisely
exactly what
that.
it is. Yeah.
Precisely what it is.
Right.
Yeah. So Ukraine is a proxy war between the US and Russia. It's been caused by the ever increasing expansion of NATO eastwards. And when they crossed the metaphorical red line, that's when Russia responded and this war happened. And it's going to go in a certain direction. We know which way it goes. Now, there's always the danger that if India doesn't play its cards right, India may end up being a much larger Ukraine for the US vis-a-vis China. And the ideal scenario from a purely power perspective, from a purely amoral geopolitical perspective, from the US perspective, is that India and China kill each other and end of story for both of them.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then US is like, ठीक है भाई अपने बच गए अब chill करेंगे.
Now we chill. Now we can rule the world.
Yeah.
So that is the ideal scenario from the American perspective. Okay, it's a very amoral Machiavellian thing, but that's just the way the world works.
Yes.
So India has to play its cards right. India obviously needs a stronger nation on its side vis-a-vis China, because China is way stronger than India right now, like about 5 times as strong. We do have the nuclear deterrent. We have a favorable geography when it comes to the Himalayan region, the India-Tibet border and all that. But it always helps to have the US on your side.
Yes.
It also helps to have multiple nations on your side. We are good friends, so to speak, with Russia, with most of the European nations, with France, with Japan, with lots of the Asian nations, and also with the US. Now, there are issues with the US. The Americans are trying to needle us all the time. They keep on propping up Pakistan. Pakistan has always been a sore point. Then they keep on raising this issue, the alleged assassination plot against some Khalistani terrorist on US soil.
That has to be a joke.
It's a non-issue, but they've raised it and they're trying to make it into a big issue and all that.
Right.
They're trying to drag their feet on the sale of some drones to India, Predator drones or something. That's what one hears in the news. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but that's what one hears these days in the news.
Right.
So the Americans are playing hot and cold with India. They're trying to, balance things out with India.
Right.
So they want to use India in the capacity that India is a good counterweight towards China. If India and China go to war, it's a win-win for the US. But they don't want to help India too much, that India would rise too high, because they've already seen that with China. It is the US that midwifed and aided and abetted the rise of China to where it is today.
For real?
Absolutely.
When in the 80s?
In the 70s and 80s. So what you had is that in the 1960s, late 1960s, I think in 1969, the USSR and China nearly went to war. The USSR had decided to nuke China.
Achha.
Okay, there was these massive border clashes, the Ussuri River border clashes in the far east of Asia. And the Soviets had decided to actually nuke China. The Americans caught hold of that, and they threatened the USSR with a retaliatory nuclear strike if they nuked China. And then they had this rapprochement with China. Nixon and Kissinger visited China, Mao in Beijing and all that. And then the US said to China that we're going to help you out economically. And the great hope of the Americans was that as China rises economically, its markets will open up and it's going to become a part of the West. They're going to become like us.
They're going to become like Japan or like any of that version of things. That spectrum of stuff.
Yeah, that's what they anticipated. That's what they imagined.
Right.
And the truth turned out to be totally different from that. China became an imperial power in its own right. And they are nothing like the US. And so that's what happened. So the Americans opened up their economy to the Chinese economy. They integrated the two economies. They gave all the surplus manufacturing, all that, to China, so that they could do it, get things manufactured at a much cheaper cost.
Yes.
And that's how the Chinese manufacturing prowess grew. And China is now a major manufacturing power. They started manufacturing very basic stuff, but over the years, they started, increasing the levels of sophistication, the Chinese, and today they can manufacture anything.
Right.
And that's a process that took about 30, 40 years to come to fruition. So today they are a major competitor to the US in almost everything. Okay, when it comes to semiconductors, when it comes to chip manufacturing, when it comes to electric vehicles, whatever, everything.
Right.
The Chinese can do it, apart from certain things like jet engine technology and whatnot. Right. So China has become a major power thanks to the US. The Americans made it happen.
It doesn't seem like America ever learns this lesson then, because it's the same with like the Middle East. It's the same with Osama. It's the same with Afghanistan. There was such a bad retreat. They always try and empower some power to make sure, we will play this game here, and then they eventually shit-face themselves.
Well, I'll tell you what, Afghanistan was a funny thing. The Americans spent 2 decades, 20 years, transferring power in Afghanistan from the Taliban to the Taliban.
Wait, one faction of Taliban to another?
The Taliban to the Taliban. That's what they did.
It makes no sense.
No, it's a money laundering operation.
Achha.
The whole Afghanistan occupation, 20-year occupation, was a money laundering operation. Who did it benefit? The American arms manufacturing.
So the military-industrial complex.
The military-industrial complex. That's what benefited.
That's why I like Trump. I'm not going to lie. I really one of my dreams was when I was back in America in 2020, I was like, I hope Trump wins and I will walk through Columbia's campus just being so happy and like watching everybody melt down.
Yeah.
But this actually brings me to this other interesting thing. And I've heard snippets of it on the internet here and there. And like, okay, this is a puzzle I'm trying to piece. So help me. One, I know for a fact this mass immigration nonsense is fake, right? The way they're dumping people in New York, in LA, in all major cities in America, letting illegal immigration happen, and all the skilled force that's coming from India, they're saying, no, we can't give you a visa because you might all that sounds very nonsense to me. Similarly, in Europe, the way they let people in, the way that changes demographics and causes demographic conflict. We saw in Ireland recently, the riots and so on. We see this regularly happen in Germany and such. All of this seems to me like some degree a preparation for this exact year. And I have maybe turned a little conspiratorial, but I think this year is very important. 60 great elections to happen this year. This is the year where all of this sort of intersects. And it feels like these people are brought in to somehow influence a little degree the elections, to tilt a certain somewhere. My conspiratorial mind also kind of believes in like a larger shadow network of global leftists in certain way. I'm not saying the rightists don't have their power networks as well, but it, like when I look at Hillary Clinton, I know something's wrong. I know this is not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at something deeper. I'm looking at a deeper state problem there. And so what I'm trying to understand is, and so the word that gets thrown around this is de-dollarization. That this is a very interesting year. There's de-dollarization happening, which the first time I'd heard this word was in Bitcoin circles, but now it's in geopolitical circles. And it has something to do with the 60 elections in the year 2024. What is happening? What am I not able to piece together?
So yeah, what you say does make sense. I mean, you know, we can see the patterns. We can see what's going on. I mean, it's happening all over the world. I mean, all over the Western world. This mass immigration, people just being bussed in or boated in, and then they just go and integrate into society in some way. I mean, if you're an Indian and you want to go to the US, you have to go through the entire hoopla, the entire process.
Embarrassing, humiliating route of the embassies.
Unless you go to Mexico, you throw away your passport, you say that my name is Jose or Raul, okay, or whatever.
Donkey!
And then you cross the border.
Yeah.
And Indians look like Mexicans, same skin tone, same facial features.
Right.
You just throw your passport, say that my name is Jose Ramirez or whatever.
Right.
You cross the border and then you go and acquire the documents and you got bussed into a hotel and then you can start your new life in the US.
And in a very good hotel. You live in a Holiday Inn or a Wyndham or one of these. Yes.
Absolutely.
The government pays for this stuff.
So what's happening? See, this illegal immigration is called illegal immigration because it's illegal. But what's happening right now, we know it for a fact, is that the current US government, the Biden regime, they are aiding and abetting and facilitating large-scale illegal immigration into the US. Imagine the government itself, the federal government itself is facilitating illegal immigration. When a system does something that it is designed not to do, it's called corruption. So it tells you that there is corruption at the highest levels in the US. It's a deeply corrupt society, nation, government, whatever. And we know for a fact that Mr. Biden is not capable of taking care of his own
bodily needs.
Yeah. Let alone the whole country. So it's clear that he's not running the country. And it's clear that Miss Kamala Harris is also not running the country because she doesn't have the IQ to run a nation. She has the IQ of a butterfly, maybe.
Honest times with Abhijit Chavda. Yes, you're right.
So the question then arises, who is running the country?
Right.
And clearly there's something or somebody or some group or some bunch of people or whoever it is that is running the country. So that's where the conspiracy theories come in. And it's not really conspiracy at this point. We know that Biden is not running the country, neither is the vice president. So somebody is doing it, and who is that? Where does the power really reside? And it's typically in some
intelligence.
It could be the Pentagon, the deep state, the defense establishment, the military industrial complex,
right.
Combined with all the powerful politicians, the inside circle, the elite circle, of which Donald Trump is not a part because he's an outsider, and so on. So that sort of thing. And we know that when it comes to Western Europe, the true major power in Western Europe is neither Germany nor France, it's the US. Because they own the EU and they own NATO and they own the UK and everything else, right? So the major power in Europe as well is the US. Okay, so if you have illegal immigration happening on a large scale in various parts of Western Europe, one could imagine it's something similar to what's happening in the US. Southern border, the Rio Grande, crossing the Rio Grande. So over here we're crossing the Mediterranean from North Africa and coming into Spain or France or Italy or wherever else. That's what's happening. And you have a bunch of ISIS, ex-ISIS fighters, all military-age men who come across, who cross over through Turkey and coming to Germany and all that. So it's clearly a pattern that we are seeing for a number of years, close to a decade, and it's not some conspiracy theory. We know it's happening, right? And clearly it is all being done. I mean, you need money, you need organization, you need leadership, you need coordination to make all this happen in so many different places on an ongoing basis,
Agreed.
on a repeatable basis.
Agreed.
You need systems for that.
Yes.
So the question is, who's built the systems and who's doing all this behind the scenes?
CIA?
It's clearly probably the US out there.
Sorry, CIA. Don't come for me.
Look, I don't know whether it's the CIA, the FBI, or whatever it is. But
Right.
It looks like the US most likely could be the
Culprit.
the culprit or the nation or the power that's involved in all this. It looks like that.
Right.
So I'll tell you what. If you are an American, if you're an American long-term planner, and you think about Europe, you know what you fear the most? You fear the most Germany and France and Russia coming together. Okay? Because Russia is the autarkic nation. Autarky is an autarkic nation is a nation that is completely self-sufficient in all natural resources. Oil, gas, metals, agriculture,
Food, this,
fertilizers, everything.
Okay.
And Russia is an autarky. They are a net exporter of power. A major exporter they have a major power surplus that they export to China. They were exporting a lot of natural gas to Germany, and that cheap Russian natural gas was powering the German economy and the European economy. And with the blasting of the Nord Stream pipeline and the cutting and the trickling down of the cheap oil from Russia, what that has caused is the recession that you're now seeing in various parts of Europe. Because to power an economy, you need power, you need energy.
Right.
You needed cheap energy for that to happen, and now it's gone. Now they're forced to import LNG, liquefied natural gas, from the US at 3 times the price.
And that's going to raise prices for everything.
It's going to raise prices for everything.
Yes.
There you go. So that's why the European nations, many of them, some parts of Europe are in recession now, and you don't see them coming out of that anytime soon.
No.
So what you're seeing is that Europe is being deindustrialized.
Oh, very interesting.
Europe is being deindustrialized. Europe is being kind of destroyed in this manner. Imagine Germany and France coming together. When you imagine that, you see the Third Reich marching again.
Right. Yeah, you imagine that. Right.
So what you do is you destroy their economic might. You cut off their sources of power, and you flood them with immigrants. So the pure Aryan, alleged Aryan race won't exist anymore.
Right.
There's no
mythology that you can build around that anymore.
You can't. It's all mixed race now.
Yes.
So that's the kind of thing that I see happening. And that's not imagination. We see it happening. It's happening. Yeah.
The immigration part we do, because it makes no sense why you would continue to let in all these immigrants that cause threats to your own sort of historical population. I think the figure is that London is now only 50% white or less than 50% white.
I think it's less than 50% white
Can you,
now.
like, it makes, to somebody who grew up in the 60s, right? I can't think of my grandpa. If I ever tell him this, he'll be like, what? Are you saying? Like, London? And so, I'm like, why are they self-goaling? This seems so unstrategic. And then I sometimes think it is because we are Indians and we are a young nation, very industrious. We want to rise. We have all these concerns. The Europeans they seem to have given up on life. 5 o'clock, they'll shut shop. They don't have any enterprise left.
Yeah, there's none of that there.
Right?
Yeah, there is none.
So I feel like they're probably doing it because their will to life is so much in the past. Their glory days were World War, between World Wars. And maybe that is why. But this angle of American interference is so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make sense. Even if you are a very prosperous nation, but you still want to do things. You still want to build things. You still want to do something. I mean, maybe you've achieved everything here. Let's go to the moon. Let's go to Mars. Do something. Do something interesting. Do something that's thrilling or whatever.
Yeah.
Youngsters want that.
Right.
And you don't see that happening. I mean, if you look at various European nations, there isn't that drive anymore.
None.
The kind of drive you will see in Silicon Valley, in California, all that, which you still see in the US.
Right.
You won't see that in Europe.
Right.
They will shut down at a certain time of the day. They won't work till midnight or late in the night or whatever.
Or like 30-hour work weeks.
They don't. Yeah.
Americans and Indians don't tolerate that.
No.
Chinese have 995 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
They don't tolerate that at all. We know we have to work, man. We have to take the nation forward.
Yeah.
The Europeans like, please leave me alone.
Yes.
मेरे को अपने घर बैठना है, मेरे को बच्चे भी नहीं करने.
I want to sleep in the afternoon. No,
Yeah, it is. The wine and the cheese and the olives. It is. But how does that relate to de-dollarization, and what is de-dollarization?
So de-dollarization is the idea that you want to make the world free of the US dollar. So what happened in 1944, right before the World War ended, the Second World War, it's actually a long war. World War I, World War II, it was the same fight. It was a long war with a pause. I call it the European Tribal War, but whatever, okay? So the World War is about to end in 45 with the 2 nuclear tests on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
But before that, there is this Bretton Woods conference.
But has Germany fallen by then? 44?
Germany was on the way to falling by the time.
Right.
Both fell in 45.
Because the Japanese, this Hiroshima, Nagasaki were an extension of the war, technically, right? Like the war was kind of over. America was like, we didn't get to test this shit. Let's just throw it like that kind of stuff.
That's what happened in August 45.
Right, yeah.
So Germany fell a few months before that.
Right.
I think it was sometime in 45 itself.
Jamie. Huh.
Yeah.
Right.
So in 44, it's very clear that the writing is in the wall. The West is going to win. The US is the major beneficiary of the war. They've everybody is in their debt. The UK is no longer a world power. The British Empire's center of mass, center of gravity has moved from London to Washington. The entity still exists, but it's now run from Washington DC. And now what you have is the Bretton Woods Conference, in which the Americans and other nations, all their little nations who were beaten by the war, or who were on the winning side but who had been battered by the war, they all come together and they decide that from now onwards, the global reserve currency is going to be the US dollar.
Right. That instead of gold being the bottom line, it'll be the US dollar.
So at that time, the US dollar was supposed to be pegged to gold. And it was pegged to the price of gold until Nixon ended that. That is in the 70s. 70s? Yeah, I think 70s.
Achha.
So the US dollar becomes the world's reserve currency in 1944. And it still is the reserve currency. But today it is no longer pegged to the price of gold. Which means that the US dollar is a free-floating currency. It was called the petrodollar for a long time. It was pegged to the price of petroleum, crude oil. Today, it's whatever it is. The Americans can print as much money as they want out of thin air, and they can. So when you owe America a debt, you have to earn those dollars by doing trade and stuff, and then you have to pay the money back.
Right.
When the Americans owe you some money, they'll print that money and throw the paper at you.
So, sorry for the interruption, but does that also not mean, so every time America prints dollars, does that not export recessions and inflations to the rest of the world?
Yes, it causes inflation. It does, yeah.
Because everybody's dollar value just went down, so all our money became less useful.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So the Americans are sitting on this massive, massive dollar bubble. And I'm not sure how long they can maintain it. If that entire system crashes, it's going to crash the entire global economy. It's going to be a disaster for the entire world. So ideally, you want the world to gradually move away from the dollar, if that does happen. So there is this concept, this idea in various circles that the world is now trying to move away from the US dollar. And some people even imagine or claim that the US is also part of this. They also want the world to move away from the US dollar. I'm not sure how
that'll be.
How true that is. I'm not sure how true that is. Why would the US give up its one major source of power? They can destroy a nation's economy by simply imposing economic sanctions, which means that they will prevent that nation from trading with the rest of the world in US dollars. Then how the hell will they trade with
anybody?
With anybody?
Yeah.
So that's how we destroy a nation's economy. Just because you control the currency, the global currency. That is the power they have because they own the world's reserve currency. Why would they want to de-dollarize the world? The Americans. They would not want that to happen.
Who's saying that they want to de-dollarize?
There are various analysts.
Analysts, okay.
Yeah, who some of them claim that the US itself is part of this entire scheme or whatever. So de-dollarization, obviously, there's been the proposed BRICS currency. There were rumors that the BRICS currency would be announced. That would be a competitor or a proposed alternative to the US dollar. The Russians had kind of tied their ruble to the price of gold. And so on. So there are various currencies. The rupee is one of the currencies that's being spoken about. There is a Chinese yuan. There is the ruble. There is what else do we have? Whatever else do we have? A proposed BRICS currency or whatever, which would be based on a basket of commodities like oil and gold and lithium and whatever. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. Personally, of course, I may be wrong, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. But de-dollarization is that. It's the idea that you move away from the US dollar and maybe you move to a different currency that is tied to an actual tangible real world commodity like gold or whatever. Or you move to a basket of currencies or a number of currencies come to the fore and they all become
interchangeable of sorts.
They all become acceptable globally.
Okay.
That you can use them instead of the dollar. Right. When you talk about the euro, it's kind of a proxy for the dollar because the EU is controlled by the US. So it needs to be something from the East essentially.
Right.
If it is to be viable.
So East being Russia, China and India.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I remember and this is also kind of something I don't know if we'll end up on the podcast, but right when the Ukraine thing had happened, no, I'd gotten calls from my friends in the Middle East, and they were looking to import oil or something, or export oil, and they were like, do you have any contacts that can help us from Indian oil exporting companies and this and that, and we will do this in rubles. And I connected that instantly when I heard de-dollarization, that this is probably what is de-dollarization, because you're not interested in buying in dollar, save all that spread that comes from buying and selling, and sell and buy in rubles.
Right. Yeah.
It's very interesting that is.
Yeah, that sort of thing has happened actually. The Saudis are trading with China in the Chinese yuan. They're doing that. And the Russians are trading with India in the Indian rupee. So there is all this happening right now. Things are being tried out. Things are being tested. The Middle East is kind of wary of the US, what the US has been doing to the Middle East for the past 70, 80 years. They would like to break free from this massive shadow that looms over them. They would like to have alternatives. So the Saudis are indeed trading with the Chinese in Chinese
Yuan. Yes, I think yuan, right?
And
Right.
even the Iranians are trading with the Chinese in Chinese yuan. So the Chinese are really doing this push for making the Chinese currency more globally acceptable and all that. But I would say it's still a far cry from where the US dollar is, and I don't think the US dollar is going to lose its supremacy anytime very soon.
Right.
Yeah.
Sir, I have a personal question. How old are you?
I'm 46. 47.
47.
Yeah.
And so, well, that's not twice. It's like some fraction of my age. But I'm curious if this is a novel phenomena, or are we falling for the trap of thinking this is the most exciting time we are living in? Because, like, very often you're like, oh my God, this is the first time it is happening. And young people tend to think that way. But I'm sure you've seen at least 20 more years than I have. Has this occurred in the past in your research or in your experience?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. See, typically when you talk about geopolitical change, if you see, I'll tell you what, you take a map of the world every 10 years, from 1900, then 1910, 1920, 30, 40, all the way up to here. You will see that every 10 years, some borders change. Globally, some borders between nations change.
Right.
And you typically see these geopolitical changes, large-scale changes happen decade upon decade. Okay? And you will see that the power structure change, the balance of power change. Typically, it happens at a slow pace, decade upon decade. This decade, things are happening really fast. This is kind of a period of chaos and turmoil. You're seeing a major and very rapid geopolitical realignment that's happening in various parts of the world. The US is kind of seen as a nation in decline to a certain extent.
Yep.
And other nations are rising. We are seeing multipolarity emerge as a phenomenon, which could be an intermediate phase between another bipolarity once again. That could happen.
Yes.
But we are seeing major geopolitical realignment right now. New powers are emerging. India is now being seen globally as a genuine geopolitical power. 10 years ago, nobody spoke about India. No one cared about India.
Agreed.
Today, India is spoken of as a major regional power, at least in the Indian Ocean region. So we are seeing, the abortive rise of China. It's not going to rise. It's not going to be the Chinese century. Now they're talking about the Asian century, which could be the Indian century, perhaps. We're not still.
We are optimistic.
We're optimistic.
We're hopeful.
It could happen, but we're not sure yet. But it is definitely not going to be the Chinese century.
And why is that? Why?
Because of the demographic issues and all that.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, all
Please,
that.
please, yes.
So all that is happening. So it is indeed true that this decade from let's say when COVID began until where we are today, and let's say until the 2030s, it's going to be a time of very rapid geopolitical change. You could see more wars erupt. You could see borders being redrawn. You could see certain nations go out of existence. That could happen. So there's a lot happening. So it's indeed true that for the first time since the World War period, you're seeing so much change geopolitically. So it's indeed one of the most, from a certain perspective, exciting times to be living in.
Right. Yeah. Let me draw our attention back to our region and sort of this rising power of India, which is true, by the way, because I don't have sources like you guys do, but I have friends, right? And the minute this Israel-Palestine stuff broke out, I was on call with several of my friends from several countries, and so many of those guys literally with their words were like, "Boss, the only global powers right now are India, China, Russia, and America." And I was like, since when did India started figuring in these lists, right? Like, this is I didn't push this agenda. You brought this up, and it's so interesting to me because even when I went back in 2017, India was a nation that exported engineers and imported BPO services.
Yeah.
That's what we did. We were the customer support of the world.
Yeah.
Now they don't mess with us on an interpersonal level. Like, even I think the spirit of the Indian in the West, when they meet somebody from a different nation is not this
Yeah,
like
it's
humble sort of bent over. It's like, okay, we can stand our own. And there is a sense of pride that's emerged. But this region right now is going through changes. Pakistan is a shadow of what it used to be even 10 years ago. And it's always been a nation in decline, I think, since the 80s, but it's a real nation in decline right now.
Yeah.
They've thrown Imran Khan in jail for 10 years. I think the last probably hopeful figure that had emerged out of Pakistan in a long time. They are fighting Afghanistan and Iran for God knows what reason. They have no strength to fight India on any count. In fact, if you ever let the Pakistanis speak on a camera and you let them talk about Kashmir, they're like, भाई छोड़ो, अपने घर में पैसा नहीं है खाने को, तुम क्या कश्मीर लेके बैठे हो, देखो Indians ने क्या कर दिया. Which I also do not think was a phenomena ever, like the Pakistani comparing itself in an inferior way to India. So on one angle is this sort of bigger thing. A smaller thing is this kind of trivializing of Mauritius, maybe sometimes Sri Lanka, Maldives. Maldives and sometimes Sri Lanka and sometimes Nepal that sort of comes about. These are smaller, trivial sort of neighborly issues. The third one is China, and I think there is an unsaid sort of commentary on China that we never in the YouTube circles have ever seen somebody talk about, that constantly gets put out on Subramaniam Swamy's Twitter handle.
What is that?
Subramaniam Swamy is constantly saying China is aggressing in the Aksai chain and the following region, like right on the Kashmir sort of Ladakh border.
Okay.
And that he keeps saying that the government is not ready to talk about it.
Okay.
And that they don't talk about it because it's publicly admitting a failure.
Okay.
And when people look at this, they often discard it as Swamy's sort of bitterness of sorts. They think, he's not been given a position of power. Like, I'm just talking about Twitter trolls, right? Like, this is a very Twitter-centric interaction. But I see him as a very smart fellow. I can see emotions coming into the guy and him being wrong, no problem. I still don't think his insistence year on year that China is an aggressive force in the north as well as the east. You also mentioned Manipur. I'm pretty sure there's a Chinese angle there. Right? Like, how are we playing with respect to Pakistan, with these smaller neighbors, as well as Chinese aggression? Yes, that's my question.
So, I'm not aware personally of what Dr. Swamy has been tweeting. Right. Okay, I've not seen that. I am not that active on Twitter these days of late.
Healthy for you. Really, yes.
Yeah. The deal with China. China is India's number one threat.
Yes.
And China is not a friendly nation. Okay. No. It doesn't want to see India rise. Okay. It sees India as a threat. They may dismiss India. They may be disparaging towards India, but they do that because they see India as a genuine threat to them. The only three threats are India, Russia, and the US.
Yes.
And immediate threats are India and Russia.
Yes.
Yeah. So now we have an official map of India, but that's not the ground reality. We know that. Parts of Kashmir are in Pakistani hands right now, temporarily. Aksai chain is in Chinese control.
Right.
Certain parts of Arunachal here and there have been bitten off by China. This happened
in the 60s.
In the 60s.
Yes.
Okay, 60s, 70s, whatever, whenever it happened. And the border is not demarcated. The Chinese have steadfastly refused to demarcate the border, which means that the border on a week-to-week basis is kind of fluid. Some days you will have this, some days you will have that. And after the Narendra Modi government came to power, we have seen a significant uptick in the number of clashes between Indian and Chinese soldiers. Why is that? What does it tell you? It tells you that the Chinese are no longer satisfied with the status quo, which means that they had a certain way of doing things and now that is being challenged and it's being pushed back upon. The Indians are becoming more aggressive and more assertive and they are pushing back against the Chinese intrusions. So the Chinese are renowned for their salami slicing tactics and they've been nibbling away at Indian territory from the 60s, 70s onwards. And the Indian government, until Mr. Modi came to power, had this policy of neglecting the border regions. Don't develop roads there. If you develop roads there, it will allow the Chinese to invade India more easily.
That's quite an approach.
So it ensured that our armed forces did not have any access to the border regions. So it meant the Chinese could build up the roads, infrastructure, whatever they wanted, and keep on nibbling away at Indian territory. So I am not sure what the ground situation is and how much territory have they been able to successfully nibble away over the past 7-8 decades, whatever it was, since the 1950s when Mr. Nehru allowed the Chinese to take over Tibet. But I'm sure it's happened. I mean, I've been to the LAC, I've been to Chushul and whatever places. I've seen the Chinese roads over there. Okay, you can see it just standing on the Indian side of the undemarcated LAC. You can see that. So I'm sure that's happened. But I am pretty certain that after Mr. Modi came to power, and the fact that we have seen this significant uptick in the number of clashes between India and China, the Galwan thing was the first deadly clash since the 1980s or whatever it was. So it tells you that the Chinese are no longer comfortable with the way things are. They're really uncomfortable, and the Indian army is now, the BRO, Border Roads Organization, is working overtime, day and night, even in the coldest of climate, in winter and all. They're working day and night, building roads everywhere. So India is building a massive amount of infrastructure now on the border regions, and the Indian patrolling is now assertive, not necessarily aggressive, but very assertive, that this is our territory. You will not cross this line. You shall not cross, like Gandalf said.
Yes,
like
Gandalf the White.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what is causing these clashes.
Right.
I'm not sure as to what exactly the current border is, who occupies what territory. There's going to be some fluidity in that. So I am pretty sure that after Mr. Modi came to power, things have become really, we have really tightened up the ship and tightened up the operations in the border. And that is what has caused China this great amount of discomfiture. And now things are even better, I would say. Now we are now seeing a dying out of the number of clashes that's happening. Earlier, like in 2018, 2019, 2020, 21 also, there were massive clashes. You found all these videos online, coming up on Twitter or whatever, of Indians and Chinese clashing with these primitive weapons,
Yeah, sometimes even their hands, like
Hands
punching and whatever.
Yes.
Also.
गोलगप्पे खाएगा,
Yeah. भाई वो मारता है उसको, पता है, मुंह पे मुक्का, एक वीडियो देखा था.
Yeah.
Right.
But now that's also kind of tapering down.
Right.
Which means that the Chinese may possibly be now beginning to come to terms with the new realities.
Right.
So that is how I see it. I am very optimistic. I am sure there has been encroachment in the past. Nobody can deny that. But I don't think it's happened in the past 10 years. In the past 10 years, we've clamped down on that. And that's why we've seen this.
And so Manipur has nothing to do with China?
Manipur has a lot to do with China.
Acha.
Yeah.
So that is a smarter Chinese infiltration move.
So if you look at the border, if you look at the map of Manipur, okay,
Right.
It's in the Indian Far East. Indians call it the Northeast. You know
Right.
why Indians call it the Northeast? Because when the British were occupying Bengal, that region was the northeast of Bengal. So they call it the Northeast. And our slave-minded, slavish historians even today call it the Northeast, even though it's India's Far East.
Right.
So anyway, that's just semantics.
Right.
So Manipur is in India's Far East. If you look at the map of the region around Manipur, you will see that across, if you cross the border of Manipur, go eastwards, you have Burma. And about 100 or so kilometers away, you have Yunnan, which is is Chinese territory.
Right.
So China is not really far from Manipur. And Burma has become kind of a place with a civil war kind of. Okay, it's almost like a place in civil war, a nation at civil war. You have the official government, which is the army junta, okay, that rules the country.
Right.
But in the northern parts of the country, you have lawlessness. You have all these various outfits that are fighting the Burmese government. And historically, they had ties with China, and all the weapons, all the arms, all the ammunition, all that comes through China. It comes across the border from Yunnan. So, there's no US there. I can assure you that Thailand isn't supplying weapons to them. Neither is Cambodia or whatever.
Right.
So it's the Chinese that are supplying all the weapons, all the arms, all the ammunition to all these outfits that are fighting the Burmese government. Now, there is obviously a US element also. They have certain organizations whose objective is to Christianize the entire region, and they've succeeded brilliantly in the northeast of India, in the far east of India, except for Manipur. Everybody else has converted to Christianity. And if you look at northern Burma, you have the same thing happening over there. These US organizations are active, converting people to Christianity, baptizing people and all that, while they are still fighting and all that. So there's a very complex cocktail of things happening over there. But from the Chinese perspective and the US perspective also, why not open a second front in India and put the entire region in turmoil, whatever is left of non-Christian populations in the far east of India.
Right.
So Manipur is that place. The Meiteis, the indigenous Meiteis of Manipur, are the last non-Christian group in this region, and the border is open. Historically, India and Burma never demarcate. I mean, we have a demarcated border,
But it's an open.
We have no fenced the border.
It's a porous border.
You can just walk in.
Yeah.
You can walk across. So you have these non-Burmese groups that are controlling large parts of Burmese territory in northern Burma. They don't speak the Burmese language. They don't practice Burmese culture. They are fighting the Burmese government. They are also fighting the Indian government. They are also fighting the Bangladeshi government. And they want to take over Manipur. I mean, there's a whole history behind that. It goes back 150, 200 years. The British started settling these people into the kingdom of Manipur after they became the dominant power in Manipur. And after the 1891 Anglo-Manipuri War, which Manipur lost and it lost its sovereignty, then the British, what they did was they confined the Meiteis, the native people of Manipur, to about 6% of the territory of the kingdom, and they started settling all these foreigners in great numbers. And so today what you have is that the indigenous people, the Meiteis, are in possession of 6% of their land. Northern Manipur is the territory of the Naga people, who are also natives, who are also indigenous to this land. And southern Manipur has been completely overrun by the Kukis. The Kukis are these foreigners. Okay, they come across the border. The last 7-8 years, if you look at the satellite images, you will see thousands of new villages crop up in Manipur, in southern Manipur. So all these Kukis have come in their in their hundreds of thousands, lakhs of them, settle into Manipur, and they are creating chaos and all that. So it's a very nicely calibrated ploy to destabilize. Like we say, massive immigration is always going to cause chaos
Issues,
and disaster. So that's what we are seeing playing out over here. So right now, I would say that half of Manipur is under foreign occupation in some form or the other. But what's the solution? The solution is going to be a long-term solution. There's no short-term solution to this. You don't go and just wipe out people. There has to be a proper, calibrated, long-term solution to this, by which you would want to give justice to the native Indians and not to foreigners. So eventually, we're going to have to expel the infiltrators out of India at some point in time when we are a much stronger nation. Right now, China, we don't want to mess with China and the US at the same time.
Right.
So right now, I suppose the people of Manipur, the indigenous people of Manipur, will have to swallow some pain for a decade or two, perhaps.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And how's about Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, and that matrix?
Yeah, that. So Pakistan has always been a nation for hire. It's a mercenary nation.
Right.
Every nation has an army. In Pakistan, you have the reverse. The army has a nation.
Yes.
Has a nation of its own.
Yes.
And they've always been for hire, the Pakistan army. As we know, 70s, 80s, 90s, during the time period, the Pakistanis bled India through terrorism. And this terrorism was funded and financed by the US. It is a known fact. Nobody can deny it. The Americans funded and financed Pakistani terrorism in India for decades. Then for some time, the Americans, after the fall of the USSR, kind of lost interest. Of course, they did use Pakistan as a staging base for the Afghanistan invasion. Yes. For that time, Pakistan was important for them. Then for a decade or so, Pakistan went into the Chinese embrace. Iron brothers, they used to call each other.
Yeah.
And then there was Imran Khan's regime, which came to power. He was obviously a puppet. He was never really in power. But he tried to be best friends with the Chinese. And then he was overthrown in a coup or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And then Pakistan comes back firmly into the US embrace.
Again, right now. This is right now.
Right now. Right. So Pakistan is now, once again, a US proxy. And we know the relationship between the US and Iran.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
the US
bad.
and Iran relationship is bad since 1979. So why not use Pakistan as a destabilizing factor for India and for Iran as well? Right? And Pakistan and Iran never have had really friendly relations.
Right.
When the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was in power, they had reasonably good relations.
Right.
When 65 happened, when 71 happened, I believe the Pakistanis flew out their fighter planes and parked them on Iranian air bases so that India would not destroy those fighter planes. So the Iranians did allow the Pakistanis to park their fighter planes on Iranian military bases, in Iranian military bases. So they had good relations then. But after the Islamic Revolution, 1979...
Yeah, 78, 79.
Yeah. After that, Iran becomes a theocratic nation,
Yes.
a Shia nation.
Right.
Pakistan has always been a theocratic nation, formed on the basis of religion,
Yes.
a Sunni nation.
Sunni nation.
So there you have it, the dichotomy and the dissonance.
Right.
So after that, they never get along together. And then the Afghanistan thing happens. Pakistan destabilizes Afghanistan. There's a big influx of Afghan refugees into eastern Persia as well, Iran as well.
Right.
And many of them still stay there, still live there. So all that. So Iran doesn't like Pakistan. So Pakistan has how many neighbors? 3. India, Afghanistan, Iran. No one likes them. Okay. And so then the Iranians launched a few strikes into Pakistani territory, targeting Pakistani terrorist outfits who were see, the wonderful thing about the Iran-Pakistan border is that it is the old India-Iran border, India-Persia border.
Right.
Okay, and half of and the region that it occupies is the Makran coast, Balochistan. So Balochistan is this unrecognized nation.
Right.
Half of it is in Persia, half of it is in Pakistan.
Right.
Okay, it's divided between these two nations, and on both sides you have the same people, the same language, the same culture, the same ethnicity, the same possible desire for freedom, independence. So neither Iran wants to give the Balochis independence, neither does Pakistan.
Right.
But Iran accuses Pakistan of harboring anti-Iran terrorists on its side of the border, and Pakistan now claims the Iranians are doing the same thing.
Right.
So that's what led to these clashes. But I would say that it doesn't make sense for the two nations to go to war because Pakistan is a nuclear power. Iran may be an undeclared nuclear power by now. They may have enough fissile material for 5 or 10 warheads. And Iran has a reasonably powerful overall
geopolitical influence, powerful in some way.
They have good power projection abilities and they have a reasonably powerful military economy, all that, comparatively with Pakistan.
Right.
So if the two nations were to go to war, it would be a ruinous war for both of them.
Both
Doesn't
of
make
them.
sense.
Yes.
There you have it.
Right. Okay, I think as far as geopolitics is concerned, I could go on, but like we'd just talk about more warheads and more wars. Is there a question you have, sir?
No, I'm good. I'm here at your disposal. You have questions for me, I'll take them.
No, but thank you so much. How long have you been doing this? 180.
118.
Yeah, that's more than enough.
All right.
Sir, are you ready for dinner then?
Let's have dinner.
Okay, thank you so much. This was absolutely fantastic.
Lovely
thank
talking
you
to
so
you.
much
Good
for
fun.
coming, sir.
डाउनलोड दी ऐप कुकू FM। आप लोगों के लिए 50% ऑफ का कूपन भी लिखा है प्रखर 50, जिसे यूज करके आप फर्स्ट मंथ पे डायरेक्ट 50% डिस्काउंट भी ले सकते हो, ओनली एट ₹49। एंड कमेंट में मुझे बताओ विच ऑडियो बुक डिड यू लिसन टू।